You're listening to the Pharmacist Answers podcast. I'm Cynthia, the pharmacist, and today you'll get your questions answered and your curiosity cured. It's getting to be flu season, so I know people start thinking about what are we going to do. Some people get their flu shots. Some people get really neurotic about staying clean. And one of the things that a lot of people seem to complain about, even when they get their flu shot, is that, well, I got my flu shot, but I still got the flu. And last year that was kind of true. The vaccine wasn't super accurate in its match, and the flu virus does that to us sometimes. It can mutate viruses, and the DNA that they depend on for multiplying themselves is very fast at changing things about itself, so it doesn't always get caught by the vaccine. And so unfortunately that's kind of what happens. There's the flu, and that is caused by the influenza virus. And that is what they build the vaccine on. But what a lot of people don't know is that there is a group of symptoms or illnesses that are called influenza-like illnesses. Everybody probably knows what the symptoms of the flu are. You could probably type them out in a comment and list them to me right now. Fever, body aches, fatigue and being tired, and then cough and some upper respiratory stuff, whether it's sore throat and a cough or runny nose and congestion and the cough. All of that, symptoms of the flu. People could probably list them off real quick if you asked them and gave them a poll. The thing is those symptoms are pretty ambiguous and can be pretty widespread. And there are 5 other viruses that can cause that same set of symptoms, plus or minus some others. And unless you go to the doctor and they stick that stupid thing up your nose to swab your sinus passages and test it to see if you actually have the flu, it's hard to say if what is causing you to be sick is the influenza virus or if it's one of these things that is influenza-like. So the first virus that can lead to similar symptoms as the flu is the rhinovirus. The rhinovirus is the fancy name for the cold virus. Even though the cold with the fever that comes with the cold isn't as high as what comes with the flu, a lot of people can experience the similar symptoms with the cold virus as they do the flu. There is a virus called the coronavirus. And that virus is what was responsible for probably 10, 11, 12 years ago now, the SARS epidemic in Asia, where all these people in Asian airports were wearing masks and they were restricting travel and you were being quarantined at the airport if you were coming to or going from certain Asian countries, and so all of this stuff. So SARS is a coronavirus. And it not only causes the respiratory problems, but it can lead to digestive sickness too. So like gastritis, the nausea, the vomiting, all of that yucky stuff that comes with what people call the stomach flu. The stomach flu isn't necessarily a coronavirus, but when you have both, that was one of the telltale signs of SARS when it was happening for travelers, was you kind of had both things. RSV is a virus. Little kids and babies are very susceptible to RSV because it can lead to the inflammation of the airways, and for little bitty babies who have little bitty airways anyway, can be very difficult for them to be able to breathe and can become an emergency really quick. But for adults who get RSV, it can give you similar symptoms to the flu, the fever, the body aches, the coughing and respiratory problems. And again, unless you go to a clinic or a hospital or somewhere and they stick that cotton swab up your nose and swirl it around to test it, they're not going to know if it's RSV that's causing you to feel bad or if it's influenza that's causing you to feel bad. And a fourth one is called Adenovirus, and it was first identified in the adenoids, which are the glands that are part of your lymph system in your throat, your adenoids close to your tonsils. This is the virus that is responsible for viral tonsillitis. So your adenoids and your tonsils, they're right here in your throat, and when your glands swell up really bad and it hurts to swallow, but like you don't really have any other symptoms, you just have this, that's usually adenovirus. So sometimes people will get that, and then they'll get all of the other symptoms. They'll get the fever, they'll get the tiredness, and then have that sore throat. People will be like, oh, I'm sick with the flu, but it may not be influenza that's causing you to be sick. It may be the adenovirus that's causing you to be sick. And then the fifth one and the last one has a dumb name, and I had to look up why it was called that, because I knew people would probably have questions. And that's the Parainfluenza virus. The history of parainfluenza is back in the 50s, before they had the swab things that went up your nose to test for influenza. They would do some other swab in your mouth or in your throat, and they would look at the swabs under a microscope to see what was making the cells in that area sick, if there was going to be bacteria or a virus. And in the 50s, there were kids in the hospital sick, and they took all of these swabs from them because they all showed up with the same symptoms, and everybody's like, oh, these kids have the flu, okay? And when they did the swabs and started looking really closely at the microscope slides to identify the virus in those swabs, they identified a virus that looked different than the influenza viruses that they had been studying before. Because it wasn't influenza, but they didn't really know what else to call it, they called it parainfluenza, because parainfluenza includes everything that's not influenza. Para means around, or like around the outside, around the edges. So influenza was in the middle, and the parainfluenza viruses were all the things that fell outside of that realm. So kind of dumb, but an interesting way that they discovered that. The symptoms of parainfluenza are identical to influenza, and the only way that you can tell them apart is to look at them under a microscope. So again, unless you feel sick and you go to a doctor or a hospital and they swab your nose and look at that under a microscope, they're not going to know if it was an influenza virus or a parainfluenza virus or one of these other viruses that we've talked about, the rhinovirus, the coronavirus, the adenovirus, RSV, those things. They're not going to know the difference just by looking at you and you saying, I have a fever, my body hurts, my throat hurts, I'm coughing, my nose is running, I feel tired, and I don't want to get out of bed. Those are all symptoms of the flu, but they're also all symptoms that these other viruses can cause too. Unless they do that microscopic narrowing down, they're not going to know that if it was influenza, for it to say, oh, the flu vaccine would have helped you against this, versus these 5 other viruses that the vaccine wasn't going to touch. Because even though they're all viruses, the vaccine isn't going to touch something that it's not designed to try to match. Are flu shots really worthwhile? In my opinion, as a medical professional, it's worthwhile for me because I encounter a whole lot of sick people, and I don't get to take a disinfecting shower before I get home to my kids and my family. So I get my flu shot to make sure that whatever crud gets on me when I'm at work doesn't come home to my family. My kids go to school. Some kids and parents aren't as diligent about it as necessarily I am, and some other parents I know. So if my kids have it, then I know my kids aren't going to catch it from them. So my family, we get our vaccines. For older people, and the term elderly is kind of ambiguous, and in most demographics kind of means like if you're Medicare age, which is 65 right now, then you fall into that elderly category. But for people who have a weakened body and a weakened immune system, no matter the age, you're more at risk for having complications from the flu. Because the flu itself, getting a fever, being tired and having body aches, those kinds of things you can treat at home. It's usually the secondary complications from the flu, like the inflamed airways that makes it hard to breathe. That's why it's dangerous for little kids, because their airways are already tiny anyway, and to cause that to swell and them to close up even more, you now have a respiratory emergency where they're not getting the oxygen and the air that they need, and then they end up in the hospital. Same for older patients who may have, or anyone who may have a weakened immune system. If you get the flu virus, again, you can treat some of those primary symptoms easy peasy at home, but if you get a secondary infection on top of that, and for somebody who has a weakened immune system, getting pneumonia or getting strep or getting staph are already higher risk because your immune system is weak. So if you're down because you have the flu, then those things are going to take the opportunity to try to find a way into your body. So people with weakened immune systems may end up in the hospital not because they had the flu, but because they ended up with pneumonia after they got the flu. My dad ended up in the ICU and I needed to wear a mask because I didn't get my flu shot. And the thing is, if you don't get your flu shot, even if the flu virus doesn't make you sick, you can carry it around and give it to somebody else. That is the one. I get my flu shot because I don't want to get sick, because I don't want to have to miss work and I don't like feeling miserable. 2, even if my immune system is strong enough to keep it at bay without the flu shot, I have the risk of carrying it from somebody that I encountered at work home to my kids, and my kids who may have weaker immune systems because they're younger may just catch it from me and it's like, oh, I didn't get sick. How'd you get sick? I didn't know anybody was sick, because I was a carrier. I wasn't contagious in the fact that I had symptoms and I was able to spread the virus, but I was a carrier of that virus. And a lot of adult vaccines and adult sicknesses work that way, where we can be carriers of measles, we can be carriers of pertussis, we can be carriers of the flu, and they don't make us sick because we've had all of this life that we've lived and experienced and gotten sick and built immunity naturally. But then we encounter somebody who has a weakened immune system, who may already be sick in one way, and therefore they're susceptible to sicknesses in other ways. Little babies and little kids who don't have the experience of the natural immunity built over their life, then what we carry can infect them and make them sick. So that is kind of that gray area where people are like, well, if I've never had the flu, so why do I need the flu shot? But do you want to be a carrier? It's not just about protecting you, it's about protecting those around you and that you encounter. Because maybe not everybody is going to get their flu shot. Maybe not everybody is able to get their flu shot because they're allergic to something in it or they've had a reaction to it. If that's somebody that I love, then I feel like I'm responsible for making sure that they don't get it from me. I don't want to be the root cause that they got sick from the flu. So I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure that it doesn't come from me. Now, if other people are irresponsible because they don't get their vaccine or they don't wash their hands good and you don't clean off the shopping buggy good and all of that stuff, there's all kinds of places that you can get infected and get sick from. But I want to make sure that it can't be pinpointed back to me. Whether it's my friends getting sick, my family getting sick, that is one of those things where I encounter all kinds of young people all the time saying, I've never had the flu before, so why should I get my flu shot? And I'm like, do you have kids at home? Because at work, they kind of changed our language that it's not that we're keeping people from getting sick, but we're actually protecting lives. The vaccines are not just about keeping you from getting sick, but as I was explaining, people who are in those high-risk categories, whether it's really young kids or really old people or people who have weakened immune systems from chronic diseases that they deal with, it's not the flu that kills them in the hospitals, it's the secondary infections like the pneumonia that they can't get rid of or the infection that turned into sepsis. Those are the things that and sepsis, if you don't know, is when infection gets in your blood and it circulates throughout your entire body. So basically your blood is infected. Rather than you just having an infection in one place or one organ in your body, all of your blood is infected. So that means that infection is going everywhere in your body. That's sepsis. That's a big deal. That kills people. Where the flu symptoms themselves, we can treat at home and we can help ourselves feel better, but those secondary problems that we may not experience because we're young and we're healthy and we have really strong immune systems, the people around us may not be as young or as strong or as healthy, and they can be at risk. because that's what they find. It's usually the secondary problems that come along after the flu. Once the flu's weakened you, and then those secondary issues jump in, those are the things that usually hospitalize people and kill people. It's not the flu itself. So if we can prevent you from getting the primary reason that your body gets weak, which is the flu, then we can ensure that those secondary things don't have a chance to make you sick and make it worse. So hopefully that explains it. The other thing that comes about is people don't want to get their flu shot because they'll say, oh, I got my flu shot and I still got the flu. Well, if we have 6 viruses that cause the same symptoms, and we only have a vaccine against one, there are still 5 other things out there on the planet that are probably on door handles, that are going to be on buggy handles, that are going to be on toilets, that are going to be on all of these things in the public that you touch that can make you sick and cause the same symptoms as the flu. Again, there's no way to look at you and see your symptoms of fever, body aches, being tired, cough and respiratory problems, sore throat. There's no way to look at you and say, oh, yep, that's the flu and not something else. The only way that they're going to identify the one from the other 5 is for them to do the flu swab. And if you've ever had a flu swab, it's miserable. They did one to me when I was pregnant because my baby was born in February. And I was like, I've already had my flu shot, but this was after we already found out that the flu shot didn't match real good because the flu virus tried to dupe us. And it did a pretty good job of it. And so they stick this cotton swab up your nose and swirl it around and do it on the other side and swirl it around. And then they go to the lab and test it. Mine came back negative. Like I wasn't really sick with any virus. I wasn't carrying any viruses at the time. But if you go in and say, oh, I'm sick, I think I have the flu, then the first thing they're going to do is swab you and test it to see, do you really have the flu or do you have something that's just imitating the flu? For some people, that can sound hopeless. Is it my imagination or do more people get sick now than a few years back? Well, it depends on what your definition of a few years back is, because there are definitely more people around, and with more people, then more people are going to get sick. The stance that people have against vaccines when it comes to vaccinating their kids, I don't want to get into that right now because that's a big trigger topic. And my personal opinion is if we have almost eradicated measles from our population, then why would we want to do something to open the door for that to come back? Because in other countries, measles kills kids. So if we end up having that virus circulating widespread in our population again, then what is our risk of losing our kids? So they do know on years when the flu vaccine matches really good, they know, like, the numbers show that it protects people and keeps people out of the hospital. Like last year when the flu virus kind of did a flip on us and found a loophole in the vaccine, and so we weren't as well protected as we had been in previous years. It didn't do such a good job, and then the media kind of grabbed a hold of that, and it made it look a lot worse than it really was. Because yes, while the vaccine was only 19% effective, for people who would say, did you have the flu yet last year? And they would check yes, their symptoms, even though they probably did get the flu, their symptoms were much milder and the sickness was much shorter, where the flu can last from a week to 2 weeks. So could you imagine having like the flu for 2 whole weeks, 14 whole days? Like that would be miserable. Like that's a lot of work missed for a lot of people. Even though they got sick and might have missed 3 or 4 days of work, it wasn't 7 or 10 days of work. And while the people who were at high risk still ended up with complications and still ended up in the hospital, a majority of the population, they still got the flu, but it was much milder than it would have been if they had been completely unvaccinated. That, in the global view, is a win, even though from 1 year to the next, looking at it saying, we didn't have a good match, we got to work better this year to get a good match. And I haven't seen a lot of flu cases circulating, so right now it's hard to say. Oh, when parents send sick kids to school, yeah, it's so frustrating because, for one, like, I don't want my kids to live in a bubble, because once they encounter one little thing that's going to make them sick, it's going to make them really sick. So when it comes to, like, colds, I'm not super picky about colds. We can usually deal with colds. When it comes to things that make you throw up, things that give you diarrhea, you need to stand back and don't touch anything, because that virus that causes what we call the stomach flu or the stomach bug is pretty virulent, and you can circulate it through your house over and over and over and over and over again. That is awful. And getting the flu vaccine, getting your flu shot, isn't the only thing that's going to protect you this winter, because obviously you can't say, okay, I got my flu shot, so now I can, like, do whatever I want to. No, you still need to wash your hands and use hand sanitizer and, you know, not touch things. Y'all have a happy Monday. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Pharmacist Answers podcast. The pharmacy is now closed. You can post your questions and comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/pharmanswerspod. Or you can email the show at pharmacistanswershere@gmail.com. You can tweet me or message me on Twitter at @SinHendrix. You can find the show notes at pharmacistanswershere.wordpress.com. Pharmacist Answers broadcasts live on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time on the Periscope app. You can follow me at SinHendrix or view in your web browser at periscope.tv/SinHendrix. See you next time on the Pharmacist Answers podcast.